Welcome to the Author Series. My name is Zach Bass, and I'm the brand new Editor-in-Chief of the NYU Journal of Intellectual Property and Entertainment Law. And for our first episode, I couldn't be more excited. So this episode is about one thing. It's actually about one sound. This one. I'm assuming you've heard that before, and you probably know where it comes from. So 2 months ago, Armando Perez and his legal team, although I'm assuming you know him by his stage name, Pitbull, reached out to us about writing an article. Pitbull managed to get that soundbite trademarked, and that is an extremely rare and important feat that we thought we would share with our readers and discuss its ramifications. There's two reasons why I think you should care about this. The first one is that soundbite trademarks, like that one, are extremely rare to get. They're only about 0.1% of the total registrations at the United States Patent and Trademark Office. Thus, we wanted Pitbull and his team to share how the heck they got that registered. And the second reason is that there are some large ramifications for the future of the music industry because of that registration. One of the fastest growing genres in music right now is Latin American hip hop. And what you just heard is what's called a grito, which is essentially a Mexican yell with significant cultural heritage. We're starting to see gritos being used more and more in Latin American hip-hop songs, and thus there's a potential that more and more registrations will occur at the PTO office. It's for this reason why I think you should sit down and learn a little bit about how the trademark process works and see exactly what the future of the music business has in store. For our first episode, speaking from my own personal feelings, I sincerely hope you enjoy it, and I hope we have many, many more conversations like this going forward. Once again, this is Zach Bass with the NYU Journal of Intellectual Property and Entertainment Law.
And with me is three fine gentlemen that have written one heck of an article. And so I'll just go ahead and introduce you guys. So first we have Leslie Zigel, the guy with the bass in the background. He is a partner and chair of Grito Martyr's Entertainment Media and Technology Group. He has been regularly named by Billboard magazine as one of the top 50 attorneys in all of the music business. And he is a graduate of Miami Law and a member of a Grateful Dead tribute and jam band, which is so cool. Second, we have Ryan Kairalla. He is the general counsel of Dorwell College and owner of his own entertainment and media legal practice. He is a veteran of the podcast game, and I will be linking his podcast actually in the description for this. And a graduate, of course, of NYU Law, where he received the Jack J. Katz Memorial Award for Excellence in Entertainment Law, which is a very, very big award. We've been giving that out for quite some time. And then finally, we have Justin McNaughton, who is a senior counsel at Grito Martyr and a member of their intellectual property practice group. He actually has a bachelor's in microbiology from BYU and a law degree from Washington University, meaning that he is smarter than all of us. So with that, this is really exciting, and I'll just sort of get right into it. So, Leslie, to my knowledge, I believe you've probably had the longest relationship with Pitbull. So I thought I'd sort of throw you a fastball, and which is, how fun is it to be his lawyer?
It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. It's stimulating, challenging in a positive way. Lots of fringe benefits. He's an incredibly generous guy. In fact, this bass over here was a gift from him that he gave to me, which is nice. But I think that the best part of working with him is he's incredibly collaborative, and he's very, very smart, incredibly high level of emotional intelligence and business intelligence. So he can look at any scenario, business situation, et cetera, and really break it down pretty quickly and understand and see creative ways to take things that others may not see it. I mean, I've had the good fortune of sitting with him with many very, very significant business leaders and successful people, just having conversations, and it's astounding at how quickly he can take a very complex set of metrics, digest them, and really put them in a very clear and concise way. He's great with language, as you can tell, by all the songs that he's on. Incredibly witty, very, very funny. Sometimes I think he has a photographic memory because he remembers spreadsheets I showed him 8 years ago and corrects me on points. So he's very, very together, and just a great guy. I've spent time with him, and and my family knows him, and just a top-notch guy all the way around. So I would say it's a tremendous amount of fun.
So I loved in that answer, I think you mentioned the big thing about this article, and that's language. And in the article, of course, you guys go through a Grito, that essentially this is what the trademark registration is. Could you sort of tell us a little bit what exactly is a Grito? Is it common to all artists of a particular genre or background? You know, how is it musically and culturally significant, especially how it relates to Pitbull?
I would say it is not common to all artists nor to all genres. The term Grito emanates from Mexico originally. A lot of the mariachi artists would use gritos as you know, certain signals to talk about, to intone, you know, a next part that was coming out. It's used culturally in a lot of different things. One of the things that's spoken about in the article is how originally it was his signature piece to tell his friends if he was in trouble or needed some help. So it's something that has evolved over 20 plus years, and he's incorporated it into his music. And what I think is unique about his music and where it's very helpful is it is a sign or a talisman that he is going to go into his rap right after he goes EU in a very pronounced way. There's also some talk in the article about from a physiological standpoint how these gritos, how they affect you. They shake up your stasis, exactly where you're at in the moment, and kind of a bit of a shock to the system. So it is something that's very unique, and he's well known with it throughout the industry. Oftentimes when producers will send him records that they want him to jump on, because as you can imagine, everybody wants Pitbull on his records. It's you get him on there, and it's a real, you know, good housekeeping seal of approval, so to speak, if he jumps on that, because he's been on so many big records. And they will often send it with the Grito in it. I was with him the other night, and he was saying, yeah, I get records and I'll hear EU, and that's like a place marker where they think would be a good idea for me to jump on. And if I jump on the record, that's where I go and do it. So it has been very significant for his career. The only other thing I'd like to say about that is he is so diverse musically. You know, when I'm hanging out with him, he'll be listening to everything from Earth, Wind and Fire to Michael Jackson to Aerosmith to funk. He listens to a lot of different things. And in terms of his recording, he is not prejudiced, or he is not pigeonholed into any particular sort of style. He works with country artists, for instance. He's very, very friendly with Blake Shelton and Tim McGraw and Jimmy Buffett. He's worked with a bit with Steven Tyler. He's worked with Carlos Santana. So he's very open musically, but whenever he jumps on a record, he always uses this Grito as an introduction to him coming on board.
So that's really interesting. And, you know, for the viewers that don't know, I'm a native Floridian. And as a native Floridian, I'm very familiar with the Miami club scene, which is famous in the music world, especially over the last 20 years. Has Pitbull ever explained how he got started? Because I love the article, how it explains how he used to use his Grito to warn his friends when he was in trouble in Miami. Do you know when he started thinking, this could be a good musical element? And has he ever talked about how he developed that musical element in his Miami club performances?
He hasn't talked to me specifically about how he developed that element, but I can tell you he got his career start at around 16 or 17 when he had an opportunity to be an extra on a DMX video shoot that was being filmed in Miami.
I didn't know that. That's awesome.
And so what happened when he went there, and he had a friend of his who was a real instigator, who basically went and was, talking shit and saying, this guy can out-rap anyone. And there were all these guys that were there. So there's a guy named Dragon who was part of DMX's crew who was there. And so Pitt and him started going back and forth. And this is actually all on film. He's got the footage of this. And they went, 7, 8, 9 rounds, and then he won. And it got to the point where the guy started taking out things to look at reference points. And Armando was, he's very much like a jazz musician, because he improvises all the time in terms of that. So that's when he got his start. But what was interesting is he met Irv Gotti at the time, who was the head of Murder Inc. Records. And Irv Gotti was talking to him and said, have you thought about writing any hits? And he said, nah, I just freestyle. And Irv Gotti said, yeah, well, freestyle, that means free. It means you're not going to make any money. If you write some songs, then maybe you'll make some money. And that got him thinking to change the way in which he would do things. So he started to employ these devices, the Grito. And then he started with Mr. 305. And then as he got bigger, he expanded to Mr. Worldwide. And Dale, of course, is a catchphrase of his as well. So I would say when he was 17, 18 is when all of this started. I can't tell you the exact date of when EU started, but probably somewhere in that time frame. I've heard recordings going back, I think, as far as 2001, 2002, where I've heard.
Yeah, 2002, I'm aware of. Yeah, interesting. So, as an entertainment, you just named, Mr. Worldwide, Mr. 305, Dale. He's the master of slogans. He's the master of sort of those trademark things. And as an entertainment lawyer, this is a very broad question, but how valuable is trademark to a musical performer? Do you see, your clients continuously go to it to build their brand?
I don't see my clients necessarily going to it to build a brand, because it's much more under the legal rubric of things that you need to protect your brand. But I do see them employing it inherently and intuitively. I don't often have music clients that come to me and say, I need everything trademarked and I want you to focus on trademarks. It's more a dialogue that I will have with them, to help them protect the things that they put together. In Armando's case, he's unique in the sense that many of his trademarks are relatively common words. Take Pitbull, for instance. It's a dog. Now it means something much more than a dog. And you see this with other artists as well. A great example is Pink. It's a color, but it's now an artist. And she has acquired what's known as secondary meaning. That means people recognize it more than just the color, just like they recognize it much more than just the dog, and that it's him as an artist. And Dale as well is a fairly common catchphrase that now has become his. Mr. 305, Mr. Worldwide. So he goes and does these things, and I think it's an artist's core essence to create these sort of things, not necessarily from the academic standpoint of, I need to be protected by the US Patent and Trademark Office. It's more, let me be my artistic self, let me express myself. Whether that's in the case of artwork, you see many artists, as you know, I'm a Grateful Dead fan, so you look at all the iconography of the Grateful Dead, the dancing bears, the Steal Your Face and so forth. Many artists in their creative pursuits end up coming up with trademarks, logos, etc., because it's part of the creative journey, so to speak.
And I think that's actually a great transition to you, Justin. And that's, could you talk a little bit to our viewers about everyone hears trademark, and I think we all laugh because it's just, even the media gets copyright and trademark confused. And I guess for the viewers that don't know, what is the purpose of trademark? And could you sort of talk a little bit about secondary meaning, the role that it plays in it?
Yeah, so trademark is different than most intellectual property. So like copyright and patent, these are things that you create, and then it's something in and of itself, and it's protectable. Trademark, although it's lumped with intellectual property, to really understand trademark, you have to step back and think about consumer protection. Trademark is very much rooted in consumer protection, and the idea is that if you see, or in this case here, a trademark, that trademark signifies a source of particular good or service. So the idea is that when you see, the famous Coca-Cola logo, you know exactly what the source is. Now, you may not know exactly, who that company is or who controls Coca-Cola or understand any of that, but you understand that symbol means that every time you have that product, that it comes from the same place, and it will have a similar, it'll be the same product. So in this case, what's interesting about the way that Pitbull has used this Grito is that whenever you hear that Grito, it's actually a stamp on whatever, either the performance or on the recording, that tells you, oh, Pitbull is on this track. I may be surprised to hear a country song, but I hear that trademark and I know, oh, Pitbull's on here. That's unusual, but it helps you to transition and know that's coming. As far as acquired distinctiveness goes, there are a couple different ways that you can obtain a trademark. So some things like one of the more famous ones is, Xerox, right? Like everyone's heard of Xerox. Well, Xerox was just a made up word. So it didn't need to be, when somebody saw it, there's no definition for that, right? So it was naturally a trademark that would work for whatever they wanted it to.
Nonsensical. Yeah, nonsensical.
Yeah, it's nonsensical. And in some instances, like Apple for computers, right? Apple did not mean computers. So it didn't really need to, once you saw Apple in the context of computers, it's so different. It's so, that it just functions naturally as a trademark. Other times you have trademarks that are more common, or they are just universally common, and so they have to acquire distinctiveness. And the idea is that one of the cases that we talked about in the article was these duck tours, and in that context, you had these World War II amphibious vehicles, and that are commonly called ducks. And one of the companies tried to register the sound of a duck call for that. And the question came up, okay, people hear a duck call. It's not something you hear every day, certainly not in Philadelphia, but it's something that people are familiar with. And so you hear a duck call. And then the question becomes, okay, at what point would you think, oh, I heard a duck call, that must be for tourist service of, taking people out on these amphibious vehicles. And in that case, it turns out that most people would just think that that's a strange person blowing a duck whistle, right? Like it's not indicating a good or service. However, in this particular case, when you hear pit bulls yell, as I've just been working on this project, I've asked lots and lots of people about this, right? Everybody recognizes this yell, even if they don't know exactly who Pitbull is, because they're not familiar with the genres that he's typically in. They know that it's that one particular, it's that artist. They may not know Pitbull, personally, or know all of his music, but they recognize that call sign. And that's the process of taking something, using it over 20 years, developing it, and using it consistently enough that when you hear it in the context of a recording or in a live performance, that you recognize that's Pitbull. And that's how.
And secondary meaning, everything you do is, it's really intangible. I mean, sometimes it's really hard to explain to people when something has acquired enough secondary meaning. For the USPTO to say, yeah, let's step in, this deserves registration. What did you give the USPTO? What evidence did they consider? Did they tell you if any piece of evidence was like the strongest?
No, and this one we submitted a declaration from Pitbull. We also submitted some evidence of its widespread use. This one is, sometimes it's a close call. This one had been used so much that, it was just a matter of collecting which things to provide. It also, that these types of cases are, it's, in some ways it's kind of like the Supreme Court's test for pornography. Like you just know it when you see it, kind of thing. This is one of those tests where, being in the industry, when something functions as a trademark, and based on the type of sound or the type of mark that it is, whether it's something that someone took an ordinary word that had meaning in the industry and then converted it, or took a common word and converted it to where it functions as a trademark. But once it has acquired that secondary meaning, it has, all the same power as Xerox, right? Or some of these other marks.
So I was doing research, to think, okay, how many sound marks have been successfully registered at the USPTO? And I couldn't find some hard numbers. I mean, maybe you guys are aware, but I believe out of the total amount of trademarks that the United States has registered, sound marks are, I think, less than 0.1%. It's very, very, very few. Why do you think that is? I mean, why do you think it's so hard to register a sound mark like this? validly?
So I'm not sure if it's that it's so hard. I do think that it's unusual in that we typically see trademarks all around us. So people become familiar. And this is one of the things that's difficult about trademark law, is that people see trademarks every single day. And so everyone assumes that they understand trademarks. But people don't necessarily recognize that although they will hear a sound trademark and know that it represents a certain service or good, they may not realize that that's what's happening. So for example, the MGM lion roar, right?
Yeah.
A lot of people, everybody hears that, and that it indicates where, who is sponsoring that that particular movie, but I'm not sure that people stop to think, oh, that's a trademark, right? And so I think it's just a different level of familiarity. Some trademarks are more difficult to register than others. And I think the third reason is that it's more difficult to adopt a sound trademark than it is a visual one. I mean, anybody can put a visual trademark on a website. In order to do a sound one, you have to record it. You have to get it out there in a way that people, recognize it as a trademark. It's a lot more difficult to do that.
Interesting. So, I wanted to ask you a little bit, and maybe this is a hard question, but two professors at NYU who I consider mentors, Professor Barton Beebe and Professor Jeannie Frober, wrote an article not too long ago that was published in the Harvard Law Review. And it took sort of the IP world by storm. And essentially they showed data that we are running out of word marks, basically. That the number of quality words are going down and down and down. And maybe it's because it's essentially too easy to register marks with the USPTO when it comes to words. Are you concerned? I think, I'm thinking as a layperson when I'm hearing you got to yell, trademark. I mean, how many yells are there? I mean, should we be concerned that, the number of yells will diminish, because something like this was able to be registered?
So, okay, to take the sound part of that, I'm not worried about it, because, I mean, the same way, I'm not actually convinced that we're running out of traditional trademarks. However, for sounds, it's the same way. You think about language, and a lot of sound trademarks are words. They're spoken words, or they're a name, or it's some kind of sound. I think that we are a long way before that is saturated, and truly spoken language. I mean, there, in some ways, is actually a better medium than visual, because you can reach so many different audiences, and you can have so much more nuance in it. So I actually think that this is a yet to be fully developed, although I would suspect that there are lots and lots of people out there who have sound trademarks that are valuable. They just don't realize it, or they haven't done anything to protect it.
And Leslie, I wanted to quickly transition back to you with that question. It's kind of funny. I was talking to my mom about this article, and she immediately thought of Cardi B. She's like, "Oh, okay. Cardi, like, yeah, that's another sound." I mean, and then she suddenly started naming more and more artists. She's like, "Wow, I didn't notice this." A lot of artists are starting to do this. Are you seeing? Is there an upward trend, would you say, over the last 10 or 15 years of artists that utilize this sort of tool to be remembered by listeners?
No, I don't see that. And I think, hats off to my partner, Justin, because we spoke about certain challenges with respect to this. And Justin really, had the idea of the sound mark, and Ryan was involved in some of those early conversations as well. So as a consortium, we thought about different things to protect that. And Ryan was able to take it to the finish line as far as getting a sound mark, but it is not very common. You need to have the evidence, of course, to do it. And there's not a lot of stars that have the track record of Pitbull with so many hits and use it on a very, very consistent basis throughout. So to the extent there's others that follow in Pitbull's path, he's a trendsetter. So, but I don't really see a specific upward tick, or haven't seen it over my years in the business. This was a pretty unique one.
That's it. Okay. So, and Ryan, you were, sort of our main contact. You reached out to us about this article. What about this sort of sparked your interest? Why did you think this was sort of worthy academia that needed to be published?
Well, it is a really novel trademark, and I think it does sort of move the discipline forward. And even though we haven't seen a flood of artists that are registering sound trademarks in sound recordings, I think it's the beginning of something, because certainly there are plenty of artists out there that use sounds as a trademark function in sound recordings. Our article, we talk about Jason Derulo and how he opened a lot of his songs with a melodic flourish of his own name that I'm not going to attempt here because I don't want to betray my singing voice here. Or Soulja Boy, who does sort of the same thing with in the way he starts a lot of his songs. Like those are a signaling function. When you hear those sounds in a song, oh, this is a Soulja Boy song. This is a Jason Derulo song. And there are plenty of artists, particularly in the hip hop and R&B fields, that use this. And so I think the favorable evaluation that we got from the USPTO, I think could be the beginning of a lot of artists seeing the value of this really important form of brand building. And we're going to see it a lot more going forward. And that's really what I think is the most interesting thing about this article. Is it is an example of a sound mark, which are already, as you noted, Zach, really rare. You don't, less than, I think, 200 sound marks that are currently federally registered. But then within that really small subset, you have a smaller subset of sound marks known as sound products, which are sound trademarks that are actually produced by the good or service. Most sound trademarks are what are called jingles, which are sounds that are disconnected from the good or service, such as like a theme, a jingle that you might hear in a commercial for a product. Those tend to be most of the sound marks, but there is a small subset of sound trademarks where you actually hear it produced by the good or service, like when you use TiVo, that clicking sound you hear, that's a registered trademark for TiVo. That's a sound product. And this particular song, or this yell, is another type of sound product, at least within the registration for musical sound recordings. It is the sound trademark within a larger sound recording that is operating as a source designated function for Pitbull. When you hear that yell, this is a Pitbull song, and there's value to be had there. So I think it's anything where you can be sort of the first of something or a very, very rare subset of something is always something that's worth writing about, in my opinion. And so we're excited to have gotten the opportunity to do that.
Yeah. And well said. And you wrote a very interesting book. I believe it was published in 2016 called Break the Business. And you talked, I think, a little bit in that book about how music labels are playing a less and less important role in the music industry, and that we're seeing more and more independent artists go out on their own and become successful. I mean, obviously copyright it's needed with music, right? I mean, it's inherent in the production of music, but we don't hear as many artists sort of take advantage of trademark law. A broad question, I know, but do you have any inclination as to why, and should artists be using trademark law more, especially independent artists?
Well, absolutely. And I think part of the reason why you're not seeing it is back to what Leslie was saying. It's, trademark law is a little more complicated than copyright. And, a lot of people mix up the two areas. They tend to think that copyright and trademark are the same thing, that they're interchangeable. And so obviously protecting an artist's brand, protecting their name and logos and things like that, that's important for any artist, whether an independent artist or a label artist, to help them create the foundation for moving their career forward. But a lot of times, since artists don't have that understanding of what can be a pretty complicated area of law, there is an important dialogue that happens between lawyer and musician client to explain these things. to the artist so that they understand, so that they see the value in a federal trademark registration, the protection that it provides to a client. And I will say this, though, even though artists are still learning about this because it is sort of complicated, I would say that you're starting to see a movement now, particularly among younger independent musicians. They're learning this stuff better than I think any generation of artists that's come before them. They're becoming more savvy about their intellectual property, whether it's copyright or trademark. They're taking greater control of their careers. They're asking a lot of questions about, how do I set up an LLC? How do I set up a corporation? What do I need in place to be able to start paying employees? How do I build a team? And for somebody like me who believes in artist empowerment, it's a really welcome development. And I think the greater understanding that artists are starting to have for the power of trademarks is just one example of what I think is a greater movement of this idea of artist empowerment. And it's pretty exciting for me.
That's awesome. And Justin, I wanted to go back to you and ask another hard question. Sorry. How do we know how strong this mark is? Because some people might hear this and say, well, wait a minute. If I do my own, EU sound, am I going to be liable? I mean, do we know exactly how far this trademark could stretch?
Oh, that's an interesting question. So, and again, the test here, it's not that that Pitbull has a trademark for every EU yell that's out there, right? In some ways, the idea is that he has a specific yell that he has used for 20 years, and people know that yell. So the test for trademark would be the same as any trademark, right? If somebody were to adopt a yell that was similar, enough that it would cause a likelihood of confusion, it's the same test, right, for any trademark, where unfortunately, this one is famous enough that it would seem unlikely that someone would do that on accident. But yeah, the test is the same. The test is the same as whether or not it would cause a likelihood of confusion. And there are so many yells out there that there's no reason that someone, if they lack the imagination to come up with their own yell, I guess they probably deserve what comes to them. But.
And I guess sort of as my final question, I wanted to quickly ask Leslie this. And maybe this is just me reading too much into things, but I think one of the things about trademark law that I absolutely love is when something gets registered, it's not just a recognition by the USPTO office that, oh yeah, this is significant. The USPTO is speaking on behalf of all of us, right? They're saying, okay, this is credible enough, this is valid enough, that this is already encapsulated in people's minds so much that it's worthy of protection, that we need to be able to protect this artist for working so hard and gaining this secondary meaning. And I guess, Leslie, you wrote an article when you were a student at Miami Law, and you talked about how American policy back in the early 90s, it wasn't very friendly to Cuban artists that wanted to come out and branch out to the United States and make music and build their brand. And here we are, about, several years later, and here we have this, this Cuban American artist that's just taking the world by storm. And having this one small slogan become just this huge thing, so much so that the United States government wants to protect it. For someone who's been advocating for Cuban artist rights for so long, what did this mean to you? And do you think that this development of musical respect for Cuban artists, has it been slow? Has it been fast in your eyes?
Well, I think just to clarify a couple of points on that, the article that I wrote had to do with musicians who were born in Cuba coming to the United States to perform. Pitbull was born in the United States. He was born in Miami. So he doesn't fall into that same set of who I was talking about when I wrote that article 20 plus years ago. However, it is certainly a source of pride to be working with him. I've been a big fan of Cuban music for many, many decades. and getting to work with one of I think the most preeminent Cuban artist in the world, probably next to Gloria Estefan, who he's very very close with as well, has been a tremendous honor to be able to help him carry that musical flag, and from an island that is so rich with musical tradition that he was certainly raised with. So from that standpoint, yeah, it is very satisfying.
Awesome. Well, thank you all very much for your time. It's been a pleasure sort of going through the development of this article and seeing how it's evolved. And I think people are going to be really interested in this. And thank you for your time, guys. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Zach.
I really appreciate it.